today, I have Father Kevin Odell. He is the pastor at St. Therese Parish in Sioux Falls. Welcome, Father Odell.
Thank you, Renee, for having me here this morning.
Yeah. How you doing?
Good.
Good to hear it. I haven't seen you for a while, so.
Well, I float around a lot.
You do. And you pop into the chancery once in a while, so we get to wave or say hi, but that's about it most of the time. So
Well, it's been a pretty busy year, I think, for everybody.
Been. Yes. So today we are going to talk to Father Odell about rationalizing sin. This is something we all do. So we're going to talk about how this happens, why do we do it, what it looks like when people do it, and maybe how we can try to not do it quite so much. I mean, we're human. We kind of tend to do that, but it'd be good to work on not rationalizing our sin, I would guess, right?
I think that's probably true.
That's a good thing to do. All right. So can you just start, for those who don't know you, just a little bit of background on Father Odell?
Well, I have been in the mental health field for a long time. This is my 38th year in practice.
Oh, wow.
I've got a doctor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in clinical social work.
Okay.
As well as educational degrees. I have spent a considerable amount of time in secondary schools, both administrating and also providing counseling services.
Okay. You also do a lot of work in the diocese, if I remember right, on the good grief, the word just completely left me. Pornography counseling. Is that right?
We do a program here called the Chastity Support Group.
That's right,
that meets every Wednesday at Our Lady of Guadalupe, and that's for anybody that is over 18 that's experiencing difficulties with pornography, and they can come there and find some solutions to that.
Right.
In a group environment.
Right. And so with that experience and all of your psychology and sociology experience, not to mention as a priest, you probably hear a lot of rationalizing of sin going on in a lot of ways.
I hear a lot of rationalization, period.
Yes. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about what we mean by this first, so everybody knows is on the same page?
Well, rationalization is a psychological term, which means that you find a way to attribute your behavior to some other cause or for some other reason than it really is being spawned by.
Okay.
So, for example, if I do something that's negative to someone else, I can rationalize that by saying, well, they aggravated me or they made me mad, so that's why I responded the way that I did.
Right.
And often we have some other things that go with that. Minimization is when you try to make something that is pretty big, much smaller than it is.
Sure.
Or when you inflate something. Let's say someone does something that's somewhat aggravating to you, you make it sound like, boy, that was a huge thing that they did.
It was the worst thing in the world, right?
That's right.
So we tend to do this just in our everyday lives pretty much constantly. Because when you define that, I'm thinking, yeah, I do those things a lot. So it's not just in specifically sin, I suppose, but usually when we're rationalizing something, we're doing it because it's something that we maybe shouldn't have done. Is that true?
Well, that's, I think, absolutely true. It's like driving down the interstate at 90 miles an hour and you're stopped and you tell the police officer, well, I thought I was only going 86. So we do those things because we want to avoid the consequences, social or otherwise, of what we have done or what we've been engaged in.
Yeah. And some of those consequences can be things like ostracization, which I can't say that word very well, but being ostracized from our friends, from society, just any kind of discomfort that would come with maybe owning up to something or being honest about what is actually happening.
Well, I think that's exactly true, Renee, but I think it has gotten increasingly a bigger problem in the last 20 years.
Okay.
Especially with all the social media platforms that we have. where there's a constant effort to compare yourself to someone else. And so you rationalize or you minimize because you don't want to appear that you're different than the particular group that you wish to associate with.
Right.
And so if you do something and it's not quite fitting the norm, then you find a reason to attribute that to another cause.
Right. I imagine this is connected to original sin somehow.
I think way back,
Yes.
that's the start of it.
Yeah, yeah. There was, I had made a note of something that Pope Pius XII had said. This was in October 1946, a radio message to the participants in the National Catechetical Congress of the U.S. in Boston. He said, perhaps the greatest sin in the world today is that men have begun to lose the sense of sin. That was in 1946.
Yes.
It's a lot of years later, and I think that has only gotten worse. It seems, and maybe that's because we are able to see it more. I don't know.
I think that certainly from the perspective of being a priest and celebrating Mass and preaching, I see that frequently in the congregation, a sense of discomfort when you start talking about sin, and because we want to be able to find other reasons for the wrong things that we do than to say, yes, I did something wrong, I did it deliberately, and now I have to face the consequences of that.
Right.
So when you begin to preach about sin, you can just see a ripple in the congregation because it brings about a sense of discomfort. Yeah. Sometimes it brings a sense also of people saying, that's an old-fashioned idea. There are much better explanations for why we do the things that we do today, psychological reasons or sociological reasons rather than the simple fact that we do wrong things.
Right. So do you see that as kind of they're like uncoupling those actions with any kind of faith life? They want to, it's almost like they're disassociating wrongdoing with sin to kind of pull it out of any kind of religion. I don't know if that's what's happening, or what do you think?
Well, I think we live in an increasingly secular world, which presents problems. You don't want to talk about sin, and you don't want to talk about the consequences of sin. In addition, I think that we have sometimes a skewed view of the Lord.
Right.
We see him as being kind of this almost holy card image of Jesus in smiling at us and reaching out in mercy, which he does.
Yes.
But there's the other side of the coin, which is also he's all just.
Right.
And God is always, without justice, there can be no mercy. So I think that we don't like to talk about the justice part. We like to talk about the mercy part.
Yeah, for sure. Dr. Bergwald refers to that as teddy bear Jesus.
Right.
We like the teddy bear Jesus, and
and that's a great one too. But I like, one of the things that I really think about is holy card Jesus.
Holy card, yes.
He's
I've not really heard that before, but that's a good one. Yeah.
Well, because it's it's something we stick away in our prayer book, and we forget that Jesus walked the face of the earth with us.
Yeah.
And so I think that one of the biggest dangers that we face right now is this, and this goes back to my own profession, that there's lots of reasons that you can find for why someone does something. They came from a abusive home life, for example, or they suffered some kind of grief or loss that causes them to do some wrong thing. And it's easy to look at it from that psychological perspective as opposed to, well, you deliberately did something that you knew was wrong.
Right. And then you kind of let people off the hook when they maybe should. It would be better for them to not be let off the hook so they can actually deal with the actions that they did.
Or to face the reality that they need to make changes.
Right. Very true. Because they may not make the changes if they don't do that, I imagine. Has that been your experience?
Yeah. Well, if you have an excuse for why you did something, then there's really no reason to seek change. If if you become aware that, look, I offended God, I offended my neighbor, then there's a reason that you need to do something different.
Right, right. So society definitely plays a role in this. I think there's so much pressure to be a certain way, do certain things, look a certain way on social media, as you mentioned. Is there something we can, we have to find ways to work against this. So if society is constantly, we can't blame society entirely. Our own nature and society are kind of always pulling us this way. So are there things we can do to start to work against that rationalization that you're seeing?
Well, let me, before we get into that, give you a classic example, I think, of what is happening right now, something that is probably familiar to a lot of our young people. It's a program that you can get on. It's called TikTok.
Oh, yes.
And TikTok is one of those things where you accept a challenge to go out and take something and then take a picture of it and post it. So you can go now on TikTok and you see mirrors that have been taken out of school bathrooms or trophies that have been taken out of the trophy case. I went on not long ago just to see what was on there, and there was a young boy. You couldn't see his face, but he was holding up a host, and he was saying, "Look what I got at church on Sunday."
Man.
So there's that sense, of it being a challenge. Mm-hmm. It's not seen as being something wrong.
Right.
Now, when they steal the mirror or they take the trophy or whatever they're doing, they certainly don't return it.
Right.
But that is completely lost in this mystique that they've created, which is, I'm going to be in this competition and I'm going to do the most egregious thing that I can think of to gain notoriety.
Right. So sin now becomes a good thing.
Sin becomes a good thing. And so I think that even people looking at that, even though they know that that's wrong, there's kind of that, wow, look what they got away with.
And they got attention for it.
They got attention for it. Or if there's something that's humorous that's put on, then the laughter, and there's never any recognition that cost somebody money and time and effort to replace all of that.
Right. So I imagine this is dangerous for our souls.
It's very dangerous for our souls because we never acknowledge that there is a fallen part of us that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. And there's no, I feel like there's no sense of guilt or anything, that we've kind of lost that sense of sin that Pope Pius XII talked about. It's like there's no one's putting any consequences on anyone. So there's no guilt, there's no shame. That seems to have disappeared almost entirely in a lot of ways.
I think that there's two things that I think about when I think about guilt. I think about the notion of where that's being motivated from. Is that an external thing that's happening? Mm-hmm. I get picked up for speeding, I get a ticket. That's an external sense of guilt. When you have a sense of guilt that's motivated by your conscience, that's a different thing. That's an internal sense of guilt. And so I remember back to my experience in a Catholic school, growing up, and the sisters that taught us constantly reinforcing in our mind that we make decisions and that we have to accept the consequences of the things that we do. And so that created, I think, in us a sense of a conscience, a sense of an understanding of right and wrong that was internal.
Right.
Not something that was consequential to what society said or didn't say.
Right. And maybe that isn't happening as much now, do you think?
Well, I think that parents certainly try, but then, when you go out and about in the public school sector, for example, you can't talk about those kinds of things.
Right.
So there's not the same emphasis on values that we had in a parochial system. It's not to say that the public schools are not good. They are. I've administered public schools. But there are certain things that are precluded from them doing because of the law.
Right, right. So I have even noticed myself, I'm going to go to confession or something like that, especially confession. Here's offer like, so you confess your sin, and sometimes you have a couple little, well, I did it because of this, or just little excuses kind of for the sin. Do you hear that in confession? Please tell me I'm not the only one who does that occasionally.
No, you're not.
Okay,
you're
good.
not. I think that one of the things that causes that, I think, is a sense of discomfort.
Right.
You come in and you confess a sin, and oftentimes you're not face-to-face with the priest, and so you're sitting there wondering, I wonder what he's thinking. So I've got to give some kind of little rejoinder to dampen it down a little bit.
Right.
I think it also reflects our own sense of guilt that we feel this is something that's wrong, and I just don't want to completely deal with just how wrong it is.
Right. Would you recommend that? It's better, I've heard priests say it's better if you don't do that, just say the sin and move on. And why is that better?
Well, I think, you can over-explain a sin, and then you're beginning to, when you do that, you're beginning to look for the cause of it.
Sure.
This is what caused me to do it. It's kind of the devil made me do it type of thing.
Yes. Yes, that's very true. So I'm going to come back to that question now. How do we work against this? Are there some things you can recommend to help people stop rationalizing things so much, especially in confession, but in just everyday life?
This is going to sound really trite,
okay,
but tell the truth.
Okay.
I think that sometimes to just come in and say in confession, I lied, and it was a serious lie. You don't have to get into what the lie was or how it happened or why you feel that you were caused or had a reason to lie. Just confess it.
Right.
So tell the truth, number one. Number two, don't leave things out.
Yeah. Oh, that's really easy to do. You just kind of tell part of it, and then you're like, oh, you'll get the rest.
You know what I mean.
Yes,
All of that.
Exactly.
So those are two things that I think are really important. The third thing that I think is absolutely important that helps with rationalization, at least for those of us that are Catholic and have the sacrament of reconciliation, is go to confession frequently.
Right.
Because I think sometimes we wait so long in between that we forget, number one, what we've done. And then we've had some time to reflect on that, and we think, ooh, that wasn't so good. And then we kind of play it down when we get there.
Right. That's a really good point. I hadn't thought about that before as far as not going to confession very often. You give yourself lots of time to rationalize that sin away. Yep. And now it's not so important to go to confession anymore. So I find myself doing that.
Or it's convenient not to do that.
Exactly. Very much so. Are there any saints that you can turn to for intercession for this issue that you know of?
Well, I think one of the saints that I always turn to is John Vianney.
Oh, yes.
He's the great patron of the parish priest, but also just his undying devotion to the sacrament of reconciliation, often spending 15 hours a day in the confessional hearing people's sins. And he had the ability to look into people's hearts and to help them confess completely.
Right.
He knew that they rationalized sin back then, too, so he was helping them confess completely.
Yeah, this is not a new problem.
No.
Which is good to know, but it sure would be nice to try to tamp it down as much as possible in our own lives. You have me really thinking about even when you're just driving, and you will be like, oh, that guy just cut me off, but were you maybe driving a little faster than you should have? And the part about being honest, tell the truth. So I think that's really important to remember just in everyday things that you're rationalizing. So
That's right. And I think, in a particular way, some sins lend themselves more to rationalization than others. For example, sexual sins.
Oh, yeah.
We don't like to talk about those openly because it's embarrassing to us. So we kind of, and I'm going to use the term, dumb it down, and make it less than it really was. Or if we've done something that was deliberately hurtful to someone else, we don't want to be seen as being that kind of person that strikes out or does something in anger. Yet it's when we acknowledge those weaknesses in us in complete honesty and openness that we are really able to begin the process of making amends for them.
Yeah. And that's the important part, to make amends and to heal from it.
Absolutely.
Is there anything we missed?
I don't think so. I think we have to understand that we're dealing with both a psychological issue as well as a spiritual issue. And to the best of our abilities to continue to stress to people the need to be rigorously honest in how we look at ourselves and what we do.
Yeah. And turn to Jesus for help in it.
Amen.
He will help you if you ask him.
He will help you, and he'll do it in a gentle way.
Right.
But in a very blunt and straightforward way as well.
A loving dad way.
Yep.
Thanks so much for being here today with me, Father Odell. It was a pleasure, and I really appreciate you talking on this topic with us.
Well, thank you, Renee, for inviting me.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks.
God bless you.
All right. If you haven't found us on social media yet, you can find us at Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and on YouTube. Most of our programs are on YouTube on video at SF Diocese. That is it for us today. Hope you'll join us again next week for more Catholic Views.